Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here this morning and joining Taka's webinar. Just a few quick announcements. We will be having questions at the end of the presentation, and you can go ahead and write them in the control panel under the question tab, and we will do our very best to answer as many as possible. Also, after the webinar, you will receive a survey, and if you fill out the survey, you will also receive the slides from today's presentation as well. So again, thank you so much for being here. Our topic today is nutrition and autism as informed by the latest science. And our presenter is Dr. Richard Boles. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to you. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Boles.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. Well, the first slide here pretty much tells it all. And these pictures really tell the story. You need good food and appropriate dietary supplementation with many different things to really do well to impact autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders. So with that to do, we'll go on to the next one. Okay, so who am I? I think of myself as a clinician. I'm mostly a physician for the last 30 years. But I'm also a research scientist. I had a laboratory. I was USC faculty for 20 years. I'm coming to you today as the Chief Medical and Scientific Officer of NeuroNeeds, which is a startup company that produces some products that I'll go into. I've also been the medical director of DNA sequencing companies, which I no longer am, but I still use a lot of DNA sequencing in my own practice. And I've done legal work, particularly Munchausen by proxy and vaccine court. But with all of these things, what I really am is I'm a doctor treating my patients the best way possible. And I found that nutritional supplements made a huge difference in my patients with all neurodevelopmental disorders, autism in and off the spectrum and related disorders. And then based on this, I made some of my own products to try to maximize those benefits. So other disclosures. I'm going to show you personalized medicine. Personalized medicine is said to have an N of 1. You have the patient, and nobody else in the world is going to have that exact variant and the other variants that the patient has in the DNA. We have 3 billion nucleotides in our DNA, and there are hundreds of thousands that are highly polymorphic, meaning different people have different variants at that position. And that's not even including all the rare variants that are unique to each individual or family. So in personalized medicine, you look at the individual's genetics and you make a decision based on that. It's not based on any studies because you don't have anyone to study other than that one patient, and it's certainly not FDA approved. So all of the treatments I'm going to talk about are not FDA approved. They're based upon treating the individual patient in a personalized medicine mode. The other thing is that I'm going to be talking about nutritional supplementation. The company that I represent, NeuroNeeds, is only a couple years old now, but I've been using nutritional supplementation for 30 years now in my patients, and very aggressively in the last 25 years to help them out. I've been using Mitochondrial in autism in particular for the last 25 years. And I'm going to give you the benefit of some of that experience. Many of the case reports I'm going to talk about are historical. I'm still following the patients, many of which are more recent. I also want to thank everybody for this. Would be like one of the quarantine webinars I'm giving. I'd like to go around the country and talk to everybody and meet you in person and talk about your family and your child. But that's not really possible right now. So I thank you for doing the best that you can and to be involved in webinars. And I hope that this makes a big difference, because no matter how much I travel and everything, I can only see a small number of people. And I'm hoping that we can reach a large number of people that are not really part of the main autistic community by reaching out with webinars into their homes, especially since they have probably nothing better to do in many cases right now. Okay, first case is Payam. He's a young adult. He was 18 when I first encountered him. Payam has what I call, if you see at the beginning, at the top there, relatively uncomplicated autism, as if such a thing exists. Yeah, he has autistic spectrum disorder, diagnosed at 18 months. Unfortunately, like some other cases I have, it followed a vaccination. He had hypotonia, mental health issues, including OCD, anxiety, irritability, and aggression, which was actually the main concern of the family. And then functional issues, GI, fatigue, things like that. But actually, this is pretty common in kids with autism, and I consider this, despite the fact that there's more going on, a relatively uncomplicated case. DNA sequencing found variants in many different genes. In fact, we find variants in tens of thousands of genes. Well, actually we do, because there's 23,000 genes. We find variants in most of them, but we find tens of thousands of variants. So which ones are important? I remember in PAEM, there were 3 variants that I thought were possibly important, candidate variants, and after discussion with the family and the physician, which in this case was the same person, they came up with this one, the solute ligand carrier 6A8, which is the creatine transporter. Transports creatine from blood to brain. Some of you may know about creatine because it's used in bodybuilders. Muscle uses creatine for energy, but brain uses creatine for energy as well. And without it, the brain runs out of energy and you get mental retardation, autism, seizures, and other neurodevelopmental problems. So this was actually, the lower part of the slide was cut and paste from the Cortigen report, which was a lab that I was working with that's no longer in business. And the stars are based upon the father and mine, is that these really match the patient. And so based upon this, we said, okay, there's a problem getting creatine in the brain, which by the way is not a rare problem, particularly in boys, because it's on the X chromosome. It's one of the more common causes of treatable mental retardation, in fact. The problem is that creatine goes across the blood-brain barrier. It requires the carnitine transporter. But sometimes if the transporter works a little bit, you can overwhelm the defect by just giving huge amounts of creatine, which we tried and it failed. Creatine doesn't always work in this condition. So the father went ahead and got cyclocreatine, which is in some energy drinks, and gave cyclocreatine to the child. And he's a young adult, and PAEM got dramatically better. Now, the father, being a physician, realized that he didn't want to bias it, so he let the OT, which was doing the a lot of the education, the OT and PT with the patient, just to say, you know, are there any changes? And the OT mentioned that, you know, that PAEM was dramatically better, and what did you do? And these things improved on cyclocreatine. And you can see that many of those are core autism findings: behavior, language, awareness of the environment. And it's often said that there's no treatment for core autism findings. And that's true if you look at the population. There's no treatment that across the population will work in a large number of them. That's because autism is really not one condition, but a symptom of many, many different genetic findings that can do this. And if you can find the exact problem and if you can fix it, a lot of times that the patient is helped dramatically. And certainly not all of my cases have this much of a dramatic, but many of them do. It's not that unusual. Here's the next one, is Kelly. Kelly presented to me as a teenager. She's now in her 30s. She has an autism spectrum disorder, that's true, but that's not her major issue. Kelly has autism as part of a more complicated condition. She had migraine 24/7, 365, which left her completely disabled, and that was her major issue. She had severe chronic fatigue syndrome, could barely leave her room, bowel dysmotility, dysautonomia, severe depression and anxiety that was severe and disabling despite medications. Biochemical testing revealed signs of a mitochondrial disorder, which, by the way, it does in the majority of patients on the autistic spectrum, and even those near the spectrum. And she did improve on a mitococktail. Mitococktail being coenzyme Q10, carnitine, arginine, magnesium, vitamins B2, C, and E. And you'll see that everybody has a different cocktail, and as I learned more and as the science progressed, I also changed my cocktail, mostly to increase the number of ingredients as well as the dosing. So she got better on the cocktail, but she still had significant disability. And while her physical problems were the worst thing, she also did have disabling autism. This right here is her one of her artwork that she did. I have the original in my office. She's a very gifted artist, but she would not talk to anybody at all, ever. She'd talk to her mom, and otherwise she would use the computer to discuss things with people. And she can type things very quickly and come up with entire paragraphs. She's actually very bright, but she would not interact with any other young women or young men, and she would not show her artwork to anybody. We did DNA testing and found that she had 2 predicted mutations in the gene that changes glutamine, which is this amino acid in the cartoon over here on the far right, to glutamate, which is another amino acid. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. But glutamate goes to alpha-ketoglutarate in the Krebs cycle, which is the main part of energy metabolism, right in the center of the metabolic pathways. So I figured, is the problem that she doesn't have enough alpha-ketoglutarate? Now, alpha-ketoglutarate is not one of the supplements I had her on. It's, if you go to a vitamin store or online, you can find literally several hundreds, if not thousands, of different supplements. It's not one that I thought about giving. And so they went to the store, got alpha-ketoglutarate, and this is the actual email the mom sent. And the color is added. And I just copied and pasted it there. We doubled the alpha-ketoglutarate, we doubled it again, and we doubled it a 3rd time, and she improved each time. And when she was off alpha-ketoglutarate for a few reasons, mostly because they live in fire country and they had to evacuate twice, she got worse. And so it really made a dramatic difference in her. And this is part of the mitococktail. Alpha-ketoglutarate is involved in energy metabolism, as is creatine. But cyclocreatine and alpha-ketoglutarate certainly would not have been things that I would have thought of without the genetics. So what is autism? And oh, by the way, Kelly is the artist here. See, she's pretty good, isn't she? Well, this is a bold statement. Autism is no longer an idiopathic disease. For those of you that don't know the word idiopathic, you'll never forget it because I'm going to tell you what it is. Idiopathic means we don't know what it is. But take it apart. Idio means that the doctor's an idiot and the patient's pathetic. A family told me that once, and I always get laughs on it. Anyway, it's true. If you're idiopathic, that means you don't know what the problem is, and without knowing what the problem is, you really can't treat it. And until fairly recently, autism was idiopathic, but it's not now. We know what causes autism. We don't know 100%, and there's a lot more to learn. But basically, we have a really good idea as to what it is. All disease results from a failure to maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis is the balance of life. If you go off kilter, if you go off balance, then you can have disease. And there's a lot of redundancy in biology to try to bring you back to a balance. Autism is the behavioral outcome upon a failure to maintain brain homeostasis. There are a very large number of genetic and environmental factors which can predispose towards autism. The number of genes that are very highly connected to autism is in the hundreds now, thousands of which are likely related. But even though that autism is really a problem in the larger brain, it's when you see it, you know it. It's like if Down syndrome, once you've seen a few, you know it just across the room, just by gestalt. And autism is the same way. As if you're an autism specialist or you're a family and you've seen many cases, you know it when you see it, but it's hard to describe it. So it does exist. But what happens is when homeostasis fails in terms of the brain connections that require highly integrated tasks, and that includes gray areas on far away in the brain that need to connect and work together in integrated ways. And language and social behavior are 2 of the major things that we do as humans that require that highly integrative connection of different areas of the brain. And that's when you get autism. And the reason you see autism with so many other things is that if one area of the brain is affected, often other areas of the brain are affected as well. And so you can see other phenotypes, what people think of as other conditions, but they're really just other symptoms of an underlying brain disorder. Okay, this is hard science, and I'm just going to show you one hard science slide to show you that, that we really do have a fairly good idea of autism. This is from 4 years ago, and you can see on the bottom left with the reference. Actually, it's published now. I put this on a slide when it just came out. But these are some of the clusters that you can look at that autism, and just look at the slide, look at all the pathways involved. There are far more than that are understood right now. There are many different pathways that are involved in autism. But the reason to show this slide is, well, number one, the complexity. Autism is not one biological problem, so there's not going to be one solution that fits with everybody. But second, the arrows are mine. The blue arrows I added to the slide. All of those pathways are treatable. Now, not every pathway is treatable, but most of the pathways on the slide are treatable. And that's one of the things is, yes, autism is genetic. Yes, it is biological. It is inborn, but that does not mean you can't do anything about it. A lot of people don't want genetic testing. A lot of people resist the idea that autism is genetic, because if it's genetic, then environment means nothing. And if environment means nothing, you can do nothing. But that's actually the opposite. It is genetic. And if you understand the genetics, then you can understand how to do something about it. Autism, like any other disease, has environmental and genetic components. But the genetic components are really your risk. They're the cards that you are dealt. And the environment is how you play your hand. And if anyone's ever played poker or any other card game like that, an expert can win with a bad hand, and a novice can lose with a great hand. And it really, if you know how to play your hand, if you know the cards that you were dealt, if you know your genetics, then you can help. I never would have thought of cyclocreatine in PAM. I never would have thought of alpha-ketoglutarate in Kelly. And I can show you at least 100 examples of where knowing the problem makes a difference. So genetics and environment are critical, but it's really important to understand the genetics to really know what to do about the environment. If you look at the literature and you just say, deficiencies in autism, everything that's on the slide here has been shown in some study somewhere as being low in blood or hair in autism, usually in children, but some of the times in adults, versus kids without autism. And so there are dietary deficiencies, and many of them are because kids with autism have unusual personalities, which in terms of food, and they have food preferences. And that's some of it, but it's not all of it. So these are the things that can be deficient. I added the green, that's my emphasis. These are the core ones that I'm going to talk about. Not necessarily that they're more important than the others, but they're better studied. More people did studies, and the studies were positive. That doesn't say the others are not important as well. Now, nutritional therapy can help with a dietary deficiency, but that's not the main reason for helping. In PAM, giving cyclocreatine was not because he was deficient in creatine. And in Kelly, giving alpha-ketoglutarate was not because she was deficient in that. They needed pharmacological doses multiple times, hundreds, thousands of times higher than that in a good diet to get the improvement that they did. Because yes, you want to correct a dietary deficiency, but that's not all that you want to do. You want to push the metabolic pathways in the direction of healing, or at least the direction that we think that healing is. And so that's why you'll see in many of the products that I'm going to be talking about, while the dosages are extremely high, it's not just to correct a deficiency, and you can't do it just by diet alone. So the last slide was on autism. This slide is on mitochondria and autism. That over half of individuals on the autistic spectrum have mitochondrial deficiencies. And there's a lot of papers by Dr. Richard Fry and Daniel Rossignol on that. Studies show between 50 and 80%. Honestly, I think that's a lower figure. I think more like 80 to 90% have mitochondrial dysfunction. I'm not saying 80 to 90% of people on the autistic spectrum have a mitochondrial disorder. No, maybe 5 to 10% do. But mitochondrial dysfunction is a part of the complex pathophysiology leading to autism in the majority of cases. It's not the only cause. It's one factor in most cases, there being many other factors. And mitochondrial dysfunction is important not only because it's common, but because it's important and because it's treatable. It's one of those factors that I showed you about, those arrows that you can do something about. Okay, I mentioned mitococktail. Do I mean alcohol? No, alcohol is actually a mitotoxin. Cocktail just means things mixed together. The mitococktail, the mitochondrial cocktail, is really different nutritional support mixed together, not just CoQ, not just carnitine, but those often mixed with many others. The original mitococktail I used 25 years ago was coenzyme Q10, carnitine, and riboflavin, which is vitamin B2. How much time's it changed in 25 years? It's totally amazing. Back then, we had no idea what caused autism. The mitococktail is ill-defined, and if you ask 25 mitochondriacs, you'll get 50 different opinions. Everyone uses different ones in different situations, but there's a core of nutrients. Some people consider 30 to be the core, others consider 10 or so. Everyone's saying something different. But when I go around the country and I talk to people, what are the 5 to 10 that you think are most important? It's amazing that almost everyone says the same ones. Because this is our clinical experience, has been there's certain ones help. These are the ones that seem to be the most common. I'm not saying that they're all of them. There's a lot that aren't on this list here. But these are the ones that I put down on the slide that seem to be that most people consider to be important parts of the mitochondrial cocktail. Not everybody, but these are some of the larger ones. Now, what is the data on these? For these that I put down here, I brought it down to 8. Now, these are the 8 that have the best data in autism. Now, I go to the next slide. 7 of those are part of the mitochondrial cocktail. The omega-3 fatty acids are separate. Not to say they don't have effect on the mitochondria, but they are not part of the general mitochondrial cocktail. But of the 8 nutrients that, in my opinion, going through the literature, have the best evidence that they help in autism, 7 of them are part of the mitochondrial cocktail. So, what are the data in there? Well, I'm going to go over the 8 very quickly. These slides are going to be available, so there's a lot more on here than I'm going to talk about. Carnitine and acetylcarnitine are very similar. When I made my own product, I went through the literature very carefully to decide which one would be most important. And when I got to the end of it, I decided that I cannot make a decision. The literature does not, some people say one, some people say the other, some people are dead set that one of them is more important than the other. And there's been no studies head-to-head between them. So I put both of them equally into my product because I really didn't know what to do and I didn't want to make the wrong decision. But you'll hear different things about that. Acetylcarnitine is just carnitine with an acetyl group on it. It has advantages and disadvantages to put that acetyl group on it. What they do more than anything else is they detoxify the mitochondria. If the mitochondria is not working very well, it develops toxins. You can think of a car, if it doesn't work very well, burning gasoline, you get half-burned gasoline. And that comes out in the tailpipe. And you need to scrub it with your catalytic converter. But in the mitochondria, you burn fats and sugars for energy for the most part. And if they're not burned very well, you get half-burned fats and half-burned sugars, and they go out the tailpipe, which is mostly the urine, sometimes the stool. And these things can be toxic, and carnitine acts to scrub it, to remove it from the mitochondria. Acetylcarnitine already has, carnitine's like empty trash trucks. Acetylcarnitine are trash trucks already dumped with acetate in it. Acetate's vinegar. So you say, well, why shouldn't you use the empty trucks? Well, yeah, I guess you should, but the acetylcarnitine goes across membranes better. So there you have it. I use both. They're critically important in patients with metabolic disorders, and the red on the slide is what can you do about blood? I always measure it. There are some theoretical concerns that very high doses of carnitine might increase the chance of heart disease later in life. So I check the levels. If the levels are on the high side, I don't supplement very much. If the levels are on the low side, I supplement until I get the levels on the higher side of the normal range. CoQ. I can't say enough about CoQ. I just don't have enough time here. I can give a whole lecture on that. I think it's the most important of all of the 8 that we're talking about. Coenzyme Q10, usually called CoQ, has 2 different forms. And in the middle of the slide here, you can see ubiquinol, which is the newer form, which hasn't been studied as well, but it has far more bioavailability. In fact, it's 5 times more bioavailable, meaning it gets into the blood 5 times better and into the brain probably than ubiquinol, which is the older form, the one that's been studied more, and by far the most common that you see over the counter. Ubiquinone is much, much cheaper. I mean, really, it's like 10 times cheaper if you buy it wholesale. So if your CoQ does not say one of these on it, it's the cheap one. If they're going to spend 10 times more to buy the expensive stuff, it's going to be all over the label, and it's going to be easy to find. It's just really, studies have shown that you get 5 times more on this, and you can use 5 times less. And although ubiquinol products are more expensive, there's no doubt about it, they're not 5 times more expensive. And I get far better results out of ubiquinol. So that's the first thing to know about it. The second thing is that I can tell you what my doses of ubiquinol are, but they'll be, every patient is different. And at the end of the slide, I'm going to give you some like summary things, like take-home slides, but you really need blood testing. And the blood testing, I like it to be higher than 3 or 4, which is sky high. Normal is up to about 1.4 in most labs. I find that if you're over 3, that the patients do much better. In heart disease, they usually bring it higher than 2.5 or 3.0. I find that it really is where it helps. I like it higher than 4 because, you know, if it's 3 one day, it'll be 2 the next day and 4 the next day. I figure if it's 4 one day, it'll be 3 and 5. You're higher than 3 all the time. So that's my personal level. I try to aim between 4 and 7. I've had patients as high as 70 before and no side effects. They're just wasting their money and buying too much CoQ, so I drop them down. But I've never seen any problems with that. And I have seen some patients that do very well on hyperdoses. But anyway, I usually aim about here. This is really, really important. I think that if you're using the cocktail without ubiquinol, it's not going to work. It's not going to work very well. Magnesium does a million different things. It's involved in at least 300 enzymes, many including of energy metabolism. It's involved in receptors. It's GABA receptors, glutamate receptors. The thing that it's very important, there are different forms. I use magnesium citrate if there's constipation. Magnesium glycinate is what I usually use if there's not constipation, particularly if there's diarrhea. And the only thing to really know about is magnesium oxide, or if it just says magnesium and it doesn't say anything else, it's going to be the cheap one, which is oxide. It's not quite as good. You need more of it. Not to say that it won't work. You just need more. I use magnesium in all the patients, but down here, constipation, migraine, chronic pain, these are the things that's really, really helpful in. If somebody has migraine or chronic pain, I make sure that their magnesium is high. Get magnesium levels. If you're supplementing with magnesium, the magnesium levels are going to be on the high normal side or a little bit higher. And if you give them 100 times more, they're still going to be about the same. So I don't usually get levels unless I'm afraid that it's low. Okay, vitamin B6 comes in many different forms, including pyridoxine and pyridoxine 5-phosphate that everyone calls P5P. It's involved in a lot of different enzymes. It usually is involved in enzymes that require magnesium. So you'll see a lot of studies that use P5P or just B6 with magnesium. And it's certainly something to consider. A lot of people know about folate. Folate comes in many different forms. Folate is almost more of a religion than a dietary supplement. Different people have different opinions about it. A lot of physicians have different opinions about it. Different forms seem to work in different individuals. My opinion is that it's important to have folate, and in particular, it's important to get folate into the brain. And folate receptors don't always work very well in autism. The transporters that transport folate into the brain are often affected. Sometimes it's autoantibodies, sometimes it's genetic abnormalities, sometimes we just don't know. And I find that if you give folinic acid, which has the trade name leucovorin, that folinic acid goes across the brain, the blood-brain barrier, gets into the brain, and does its thing there without needing the folate transporter. And then it's converted to folate. And so I find that folinic acid is really important. What dose do you give? 1 milligram or 60 milligram? Different doctors do different things, and I'll leave it up to your individual physician. But anyway, folate comes in many forms, and it is very complicated. There's no easy way to say that. B12. B12 also comes in many different forms. The methylated form is methylcobalamin. Cobalamin is just B12. It's extremely important. A lot of you are probably on shots of B12 because you can only give so much of it in the GI tract, and after that, no more of it will get across. In my practice, I don't do that. I do have some patients that have done better on B12, and I'm not knocking it by any means, but I tend to give as much as you can give by mouth. And then if the patient is not improving after all the things that we're doing, then, then you have to consider other things. And one of them would be to use injections of B12. But it is a little bit difficult on kids, of course, to give huge doses of B12 and to give shots every few days or every day in some cases. Vitamin D is important for bone health and many other things, but it's also important in the mitochondria. Vitamin D, the active form of vitamin D is vitamin D3, is involved in so many different things. And there are good studies that have shown that it helps. In fact, one study I have here that discusses it a little bit in green is that 81% if kids with autism had clinical improvement when the levels were higher than 40. Now, why am I talking about levels? Everyone uses a different area. Not long ago, most doctors were saying it needs to be higher than 20. Anything lower than 20 is deficiency. Now people are saying between 20 and 30 is insufficiency. You're not deficient, but you may not get the full benefit. And a lot of doctors are saying we want it higher than 30. The autism studies are generally improvement over 40. Does that mean that 30 doesn't work? Nobody really knows. So in the bottom of the slide there, I said aim for a level higher than 30 or 40. All doctors do something different. Not much of a difference between those. Okay, the one thing that's not in the mitococktail, omega-3 fatty acids, I'm not going to talk about this that much, other than the fact that it's important. There are many brands out there. There's all these big names here that are the actual names of the chemicals that are the omega-3 fatty acids. EPA is DHA and ALA are what they're usually known as. Some people think of these as fish oil, but you can get them in krill, which is like squid, shrimp, and you can get it in many other things that grow in the ocean tend to have a lot of omega-3s. And it's important. Activation. This is a big area. If you just go to the supermarket or to a drugstore, there'll be a bunch of vitamins and almost none of them are activated. In some patients, activation is very important because they have genetic abnormalities in the activation. In a few people, they will not tolerate very high levels of activated vitamins. In my experience, that's about 10% or so. I think that is overrated, but I have patients that really can't handle high levels of activated B vitamins, but many of them the activated forms are the ones that work. Now, there are many other vitamins that are activated that are not on here, but B6, B9, which is commonly known as folate, and B12 are some of the more important ones. And then, as I said, with folate, there's this folinate here, which goes across the blood-brain barrier. Okay, another case study, Big Zach, big guy, way over 200 pounds, lots of muscle, autism. Lost his language skills at 18 months, no known trigger, diagnosed with autism at 2 years. He came to me with cyclic vomiting, which a lot of patients come to me, which is episodes of nausea, vomiting, and they're really kind of lethargic, really tired and out of it. These episodes can last for several hours to a week or more. And Zach, they lasted for, I think, 5 days or more. And he was hospitalized for those multiple times and also for bowel cleanouts. But the main issue that I treated was complex regional pain syndrome. His right foot would be extremely tender. And most of the time it was cold and a little bit purple, but extremely, you just touch it and he would scream. That's called allodynia, when touch is felt as pain. So he couldn't bear weight. He couldn't have a sock on it. He was wheelchair bound for 18 months. Big guy, family lived on the 2nd floor, major problem. And he went to pain clinics and they loaded him up with narcotics. And I'm talking about if you touch him, he would scream on 3 different types of narcotics. So he was always drugged and he still had all that pain. Of course, they kept MRIing him and, and doing x-rays and everything, and no one can figure out, what was wrong. But it's complex regional pain syndrome. And if some of you may recognize this is not that uncommon in autism. I have a lot of patients in common with both of them. So the treatment is I gave him the cocktail, mostly CoQ and carnitine, that was back then, but he had a few others, and amitriptyline, which acts on the nerves. And on this treatment, his cyclic vomiting went away. He became pain-free. He was walking, even climbing off narcotics completely, although it took him a year to get off of narcotics, and it wasn't like you give him one dose and everything went away. And his admissions went from greater than 25 a year. Think about 25 a year, that's one every 2 weeks. More than that, to 2 per year for bowel cleanouts. So he did dramatically better on cocktail. Later, we found the genetic factor in the neurotransmission, in a neurotransmitter, and then put him on medication that kept the neurotransmitter in the synapse longer, and his autistic features got very much better. In fact, he went from having echolalia, that he would repeat what you said, to being able to speak in sentences, which is true and remarkable, and I wouldn't have believed it myself if I didn't see him. Genetic testing is important, even if you think you've had improvement. Okay, tiny little break here to try to put it all together. This is my daughter who likes her picture taken. And my sons do not, by the way, if you're wondering why my 3 sons are not showing pictures. And this is the California super bloom of last year. So the desert can be beautiful. Okay, there's 16 different nutrients that have been found to be frequently deficient in people with autism. 8 of them have pretty good evidence. So how do you choose which nutrients to give to a patient? You all know your metabolic pathways, right? The Krebs cycle, you can see the circle in the middle. These are the key metabolic pathways. By far, not all the enzymes are on here. There's maybe a few hundred enzymes on here, which is the key parts of metabolism. So if you were to treat all of that, you would make everyone better, right? No, most of the patients I've shown you, all of them except for Kelly, their mutations are not on this slide. It's much more complicated than this slide. The slide's bad enough, but it's not like if you've gone to a lecture and they showed you one pathway and they say this is what autism is, it is in some perhaps, but not in others. It's more complex. So one of the things that people have learned is that there's not a magic bullet. You need many different things, not only because many different parts of the mitochondria need supplementation, but different patients have different defects, and you need to give a whole cocktail to reach the defects in everybody. The ADAM study, I think, is the best study that looks at a multiple vitamin cocktail. The ADAM study looked at children and adults on the autistic spectrum. It was published in 2011, so almost a decade ago. It was randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled. Those are the beauty things in a study. Nobody knew if they were getting a placebo, which is just, no vitamins, and nobody knew that. The doctors didn't, the families didn't, the patients didn't. So they looked to see if there was improvement. Some people, half of them got cocktail and half of them got placebo. 141, mostly children, but also adults with autism. So it's a fairly good study. And their vitamin mineral cocktail was 31 ingredients. And it showed significant improvements. There was overall improvement, but also in particular, hyperactivity, tantruming, and receptive language improved improved significantly. And they did do blood studies and shown that there were improvements in pathways such as methylation, glutathione, oxidative stress, ATP went up. That there were biochemical evidence that there was improvements in key pathways as well. So this is the best study that's been done to date. Bonnie Kaplan has done a bunch of different studies on a similar vitamin and mineral cocktail, but not exactly the same. I'm going to show a couple of abstracts from her. She's mostly been looking at things like anxiety and depression and other, so-called mental abnormalities, which autism, of course, is sometimes thought of that as well. But these are all biochemical to a large part. And it's shown that explosive rage got better, in particular with children. And although this is only 2 cases in this report, I've seen this over and over again, that when families come to me and say, help, I have a kid with autism, and he just out of the blue, or when he gets upset for any reason, he just becomes violent, and I don't know if I can keep him in the house anymore. He breaks things, he hurts me, he hurts my other children. It's rare that one of these cases is not significantly improved on nutrition. And then, of course, finding the underlying biological pathway by genetic testing can often help with that as well. And then the next one from Dr. Bonnie Kaplan is to show that these are really tolerated. The Adams study also showed very high tolerance. When I made my own formula, a lot of people, including a lot of famous people that your names would probably understand, said it won't work because so many people can't handle this and so many people can't handle that. And you put 33 together, no one will handle it. But the thing is that we put 33 ingredients or 31 ingredients together and more people handle it than a single ingredient. That's, you know, you think, well, that's weird. I mean, it's really, it's not. And this is the SpectrumNeeds. This is my own formula that NeuroNeeds produces. It's 33 active ingredients. It's similar to the Adams and Kaplan formula, but it has a much stronger mitochondrial cocktail than the Kaplan formula or the Adams formula that was studied. So the Adams formula that I showed you about it didn't have a strong mitochondrial cocktail. It's a powder form. It comes in 2 different flavors, and we have a double-blind placebo-controlled study, similar but even upgraded from the Adams study that Dr. Richard Fry in Arizona is the PI, and he's recruiting right now for that. So to give you some information on this, you know, what happens when you take somebody who's been on many different parts of the cocktail and you switch them over to SpectrumNeeds? Luca is one example, and he's a good example because he didn't have a dramatic difference. He was already on a bunch of different things, but he had a significant difference, and the family's very pleased by the transition. So he's pretty much the average in my case. He has autism, intellectual disability, and epilepsy. 1/3 of patients on the autism spectrum have epilepsy, so it's not uncommon at all. He was on a bunch of different things: CoQ, L-carnitine, 8 B vitamins, magnesium, and vitamin C. And he had tried some other things as well. And he improved on these. He had less self-stimming. His obsession with staring at ceiling fans went away. He would just stare for hours. His energy level improved, and he stopped having unexplained fevers. Well, shouldn't say unexplained. They're fevers that come from dysautonomia. Later, when we switched him to SpectrumNeeds, which had a lot of different ingredients in it that he wasn't getting, his staring got better. His brain fog got much better. He improved his muscle tone. But what the mother was most happy with is his stool retention and constipation resolved, and he went to normal stooling. And everybody has different effects because everybody has different genetics. But this is a common situation, is that you have it, if you put it on cocktail, there will be benefits. But then if you go to an integrated product that has even more in it, you have additional benefits. What about beyond the powder? The omega-3s are beyond the powder, and you can't put oil into a powder. It just doesn't mix. So that's something you have to take separate. CoQ, ubiquinol, with the OL form, the good form is an oil. It doesn't go into a powder. SpectrumNeeds has a lot of ubiquinone in it. And the levels do go up, but it's not high enough. I recommend everybody on SpectrumNeeds to also be on a ubiquinol product. And then there are some other things. I mean, every individual is an individual, and some need more magnesium, some more zinc, some more folate, leucovorin, some more B12. I can go on and on. Each person is a genetic individual, and their disease features are individualistic, and SpectrumNeeds is not meant to be everything for everybody, but a good platform to give 33 active ingredients that you can build on. And there are some things that are not in it. Copper is high in many kids with autism, so I didn't want to give more. You can always add copper if you need it. Iron, often, if you give iron supplementation, often kids with mitochondrial problems can't handle that. Same with calcium. And then vitamin A, a lot of people can have toxicity with that, so I kept that out. And these are things that can always be added if you feel or your doctor feels that they're needed, but they can be toxic in some people, and I wanted a formula that everybody could take no matter what drugs are on, no matter what supplements are on, no matter what their genetics is, and no matter what kind of issues they have. So I've mentioned before, CoQ is key. You want the ubiquinol, the OL form. And there are more and more products out that have ubiquinol in it, the good form in it. You want ubiquinol. The green here says, you know, that's the most important thing. Beyond that, which brand should you choose? Well, liquid versus a gel capsule. Remember, Q is an oil. It's going to be in a liquid form. So it's either encapsulated in a gel capsule or it's in a liquid. It really doesn't work in powders or in tablets or in gummies or anything else. I've never seen any of those products work on more than one patient or so. So if you can't handle, if your child can't swallow even small gel capsules, you're going to use a liquid form. The liquid forms tend to taste bad and they are extremely expensive. So some people will take the gel capsules, cut them, squeeze them out, and then use that, which is a lot cheaper, but then you have to flavor it. And that's good for G-tubes as well. Capsule size, some brands have huge capsules like horse tablets, and some of them are much smaller. So that's an issue. They're all oil-based. Ubiquinol is oil-based, but do you want soy or limonene? Some of the real premium products out there have limonene, which is oil from the lemon peel. Most of the ones out there are soy. Certainly the majority of the low-priced ones are soy. And then, of course, price makes a difference. NeuroNeeds has recently been selling QNeeds. QNeeds is ubiquinol with small capsules with limonene, and it's a lot cheaper than any other formulation with limonene that I know out there. And it seems to work better than most of the soy ones out there. But if you have a low-cost soy one and your child does well with soy and you get good blood levels, then that's great. Okay, we didn't talk really that much about the neuroanatomy, but you know that a nerve cell, you know, they don't touch each other, that there's a synapse, the areas in between, and that's really important in brain disease. And there are inhibitory and excitatory neurotransmitters. So there are inhibitory neurons that release inhibitory neurotransmitters. They go across the synapse. And there are excitatory neurons that release excitatory neurotransmitters. This little cartoon is, of course, extremely simplistic. A large brain cell can have 10,000 neurons synapsing on it. Many of them excitatory, many of them inhibitory. And whether it will fire or not depends on what these other things are doing. The balance between excitation and inhibition is extremely key. And GABA is one of the key inhibitory neurotransmitters in the brain. And to try to put this together, you know, how does this have to do with energy metabolism? The small little interneurons that connect between other neurons in the brain that use GABA, if you have mitochondrial dysfunction, they're some of the first neurons to have problems. And so there is a very strong connection between energy metabolism and inhibitory neurotransmission. If you have mitochondrial dysfunction, you're going to have problems with inhibitory neurotransmission, and your brain's going to be like on steroids. It's going to be an overdrive because the excitatory neurotransmission is going to overdo that. And you think about autism, a lot of the things, the kids are easily distractible. They have sensory integration problems. They have anxiety. Sometimes they can have seizures or migraine. These are all issues with excitation. And the excitation to inhibitory is really key. A lot of people are using GABA, which is the inhibitory transmitter directly. They use L-theanine, which is what makes tea. It's not the caffeine, but it's another active ingredient in teas, which make kind of the soothing part of tea, which is thought by many to boost GABA absorption. They'll use 5-hydroxytryptophan, which increases serotonin. Now, serotonin is both inhibitory and excitatory, but it seems to help in a lot of patients on the autistic spectrum. And then B6 and magnesium are really important for the GABA pathways to work. So these are, a lot of times I was giving people a list of things here. Try GABA, try theanine, try 5-hydroxytryptophan, give more magnesium. And if they weren't on SpectrumNeeds, to give B6. So lately we put them all together into one product called CalmNeeds. They're capsules, but you can open them up. You'd have to flavor them. And this is what is in 2 of them. For kids, I usually recommend to do 1 or even a half of 1 to start off with. And then here are the 1 or 2 in the morning for anxiety or at night to promote sleep. Like one of the things that I want to mention here, and I'll mention it again, is that always discuss everything with your physician, even if it's a dietary supplement. This can, if you're on antidepressants, they can boost serotonin. 5-HTP can boost serotonin. I use 5-HTP and antidepressants together in my patients very frequently. I do monitor for serotonin excess. I've never seen it, but I think that this is something that your prescribing physician needs to know about. So, autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders, NDDs. This is putting it together. These are my personal recommendations, what I tell my patients. SpectrumNeeds, of course, 33 different ingredients. I use it by the patient's weight. It's on the chart. It's also on the website. How many scoops to give. It's given twice a day. And then I do carnitine and vitamin D levels on that. On here, I also put the levels that I like. Ubiquinol form of CoQ. QNeeds is one of many brands. I usually start at 200 milligrams twice a day. That's 400 a day. Smaller amounts in kids under 40 pounds. And then you check the blood level 2 weeks later. CoQ blood level, the lab needs to know ahead of time. There's a lot of caveats. You do it fasted in the morning before you take anything. You tell the lab it's special precautions. But Quest and LabCorp will do this, among many other companies. Fatty acid supplementation, there are many brands. NeuroNeeds does not make one. Additional zinc, some people may want to include that. There's some information to suggest that zinc might help with COVID-19, the coronavirus. I'm recommending my patients to take additional zinc with the caveat it might not help. You don't want to exceed 50 milligrams in an adult and 25 milligrams in a school-age kid, but it might help, it may not, but zinc can help with neurotransmission as well. CalmNeeds, if you have anxiety, hyperactivity, or insomnia, can help in some cases. Diet and supplements are both necessary. While you can eat the entire salad bar, your kid can eat the whole salad bar and not get even a fraction of what you can get on SpectrumNeeds or in QNeeds. But there are a lot of things in that salad bar that you can't get from tablets. They're synergistic. It's not you get supplements when diet fails. To go to supplements does not mean you failed as a mother and that you can't get your kid to eat a diet. If your kid eats the most perfect diet, that's great, that's good, keep that up. But supplements also important. And then of course, you see in italics, always look at the italics, that's your fine print here. Listen to your physician. Nothing I am saying, because in most cases, I'm not your physician, is meant to circumvent or to contradict what your physician says. All treatments, whether they're dietary supplements, if it's a single ingredient or multiple ingredient together, you should run it by your physician. And then here, I'll leave this one on. This is how to reach me, how to reach these different things. NeuroNeeds, you can see the website there. If you're interested in DNA testing, contact neuroabilities.com, and then there's the neurogenomics under there that we can help you to order the right test, to interpret the test. And then my private practice in Pasadena, which of course is all telemedicine these days, that's my private email for that. So at this point, I'll open it for questions.
Perfect. And I think you might have just answered this question, but we've got a bunch about what company you recommend to do genetic testing.
I give an entire lecture on genetic testing, and I try my best to squeeze it into an hour. Maybe I can do that at some time. I can do another webinar, hint, hint. But it is, I use Variant YX. They have excellent, they give me really good sequencing, and most companies jip on how many times they sequence each nucleotide. They have reasonable prices. They take insurance, plus they do cash prices. They have really good, they work with you. They will not bill you. You sign a contract and that's how much you owe. And if the insurance company decides not to pay them later, which they do all the time, you don't owe a cent more. And I have it, everyone's been very happy with that. But the main reason I use them is that I can go online and look at the sequences, and I can look at literally tens of thousands of sequences and really use their bioinformatics and decide what I think the patient has, because I know my own patients more than any lab, even the best lab in the world. They're my patients, and I can go ask the family, I can go examine the kid again, so or young adult. I have no financial interest whatsoever. I am a client, so I don't have stock in them or anything. I wish I did.
Perfect. Okay. The next question, the calming supplement, is it safe to take for my whole family, not just with my son with autism?
I take it, and my 84-year-old mother takes it. Oh, yeah. I mean, mitochondrial dysfunction, aging is the major mitochondrial disease there is. There's nothing in there that will hurt anybody. That's why I excluded some things. And some, if you look at the label, some say, well, why didn't you add more of that? Because some people can't tolerate more of that. You can always add to it, but I didn't want to hurt anybody. So yes, it should be, with the caveat, of course, if you're on other medications, if you have diseases, your physician should know. But as far as I know, there's nothing in there that could hurt anything, and it gives people more energy. That's what it's meant to do.
Perfect. The next question, do you have any suggestions for when I need to open a capsule of what to mix it with?
Good question. Good luck. Yeah, I mean, chocolate, and straight chocolate, like the Hershey's chocolate right out of the container. You put a few drops in milk and it makes it chocolate milk, no dilution. If the kid likes chocolate, that's great. Chocolate, by the way, has a lot of flavonoids in it, and it has a lot of antioxidants. So it's good for you if it's real chocolate. Cherry juice, straight cherry juice like grenadine, or like cherry juice that is in a concentrate. Any sort of juice that has a strong flavor can be helpful. Some people like mango juice or lemonade, or just, whatever it works. Grape juice is a good one. Something that's stronger you can mix things with better. But some people put it in smoothies too. It's extra work, but look at all those antioxidants and all that fruit you put in there. Oh.
Perfect. The next question is, many kids with autism are using CBD. Do you know if it has any, if it interacts well with their supplements?
CBD, here in California, where everything is legal and it's been effectively legal for 30 years, we don't make a big deal about it like the rest of the country does. It's like, who cares? It's cannabis, it's marijuana, it's been around forever. It's hyped in other places. It's a great drug in many situations, but it's not a cure-all. A lot of my patients are on cannabis products. Some of them are on straight CBD. Some of them have THC as well. If your state allows it, a very small amount of THC seems to work better. I'm not a cannabis expert, but just from what I've seen. With straight CBD, it will work in some people. It's fine with all of the products that NeuroNeeds does. A lot of people take that as well. Again, ask your physician. It's like any product. If you just give zinc and nothing else, your physician should know about it because it can interact with other drugs. But cannabis is just another product, and it's sometimes very helpful. But and I've never seen any really significant problems. The worst thing I've seen is some people get side effects, they stop it, and the side effects go away.
Perfect. Okay, and our last question is, my son has like chronic constipation, so they're wondering about if you have anything with like magnesium or anything else that would help with that.
The magnesium dose which is used in constipation is often 10 times even more than what any of the products that I'm talking about with. So I mean, the higher doses of magnesium that's in is really good. Constipation is a really hard thing. I mean, carnitine can help. And you may want to give even more carnitine than to get a good blood level, because carnitine can work great on that. In fact, that's the main side effect of carnitine. If you give too much, you should get diarrhea. Magnesium can help. There are magnesium citrate in particular. For anybody who's school age or above, 125 of magnesium citrate twice a day is great. You can even double that in an older kid. You can give a lot more in some cases as well, but I mean that, the physician should be involved at higher doses, or any dose in particular, but especially in higher doses. But there are many drugs that can help that as well. Miralax, which is polyethylene glycol. It has other different brands to it. It's a difficult area that it's best to ask your physician, but magnesium is often part of the solution.
Perfect. Okay, and then just one more quick question. We have someone listening that's from Canada. Do you do telemedicine for people in Canada by any chance?
The laws are changing so rapidly. Right now, in this pandemic, we've been doing a lot of telemedicine with the caveat that when the pandemic is over, you have to travel to a state in which I have a license in. I have a license in California, Arizona, South Carolina, Florida, and then New Jersey, Pennsylvania. So, which is not easy for people in Canada to get to one of those locations. At this point right now, I'm not doing telemedicine in Canada. People are coming to a state where I'm licensed to see me in person, or well, now they never see me in person. Nobody does, except my kids and my wife, my animals. I have new kittens too, so to share. But anyway, so but they'll have to, do telemedicine in a state that I'm licensed. But I have been doing, during the pandemic, I'm doing follow-ups in Canada, which I won't be able to do much longer. But unfortunately, there's all of these laws, and they haven't really changed as much as I thought they would. I looked at the state laws just yesterday, and every state has a different law, and most of them are not very helpful in this regard.
Oh, perfect. The person just wrote, I'm actually kind of close to New Jersey, so thank you. So perfect. All right, and that wraps up the question. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you so much, Dr. Boles, for all this information. We really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
All right, have a great day, everyone.
Bye.